I thought I'd talk about cheetahs because they're one of my favorite animals and definitely probably my favorite cat. And I know they're the favorites or popular with a lot of people. So I thought it was high time I did a short podcast about cheetahs. So just to get the basic stuff out of the way, just in terms of size, at the shoulder, they're they're typically around zero point 0.8 of a meter, or that's roughly 30 inches. Body length will be between 1 and just under 1.5 meters. So that's from around 3.7 to 4.6 feet. In addition to that, there's their tail, which is relatively long. So it's anything from just over half a meter to about 0.8 of a meter. And that's 2 foot to about 2.7 feet. And then finally, body weight, typically from 34 to 64 kilos. So that's around 75 to 140 pounds. Now, the males are slightly larger, but they're both relatively small cats, and they're not classified as big cats. So they're not in the same category as lions, leopards, those sort of animals. So cheetahs are in fact a subspecies all on their own. In terms of lifespan, the average in the wild is anything from 10 to 12 years. Now, it can be up to around 14 years. Males will sometimes have a shorter lifespan if they get into a lot of conflicts, which they're likely to do. And I'll talk more about the issues that are facing them at the moment. That can mean a male's lifespan could be as short as 8 years. So there is a bit of variety there. In terms of pregnancy, the gestation period is around 3 months, and a typical litter will be 3 cubs, although they won't necessarily all have the same father. So females don't mate for life, so they'll have a variety of partners. And in fact, cheetahs aren't that sociable. They will pull together when they're a young about, but then they'll split off again and be relatively solitary, like a lot of the big cats. Once the cubs are born, they'll typically spend around 18 months with the mother. And if you look at cheetah cubs, you'll see they have what they call a mantle. So it's quite a lot of extra fur, and it's quite long fur. So it's designed to help them hide in the long grass. So they prefer savannas. That's where you'll tend to find them. And they are preyed upon by other predators. So lions being perhaps the biggest one. And I'll again come back to that a bit later. Now, most people know that cheetahs are the fastest land animal, and they can get their 0 to 60 speed to do the car thing is around 3 seconds. So they're very fast, and 60 miles an hour is roughly, it's just under 100 k's an hour. When they're chasing, I guess I'll talk about, in fact, first of all, how they're adapted for speed. That's probably a more sensible thing. So I'm just looking at things I wanted to talk about. So they got specific adaptations. They've evolved to be fast. And some of the characteristics of that are a very flexible spine. They've got long legs. Their tail is very muscular. It's quite flat. And they use it to help them steer. So it's kind of like a counterweight behind them. They also have large nostrils, large lungs, and a large heart. All of that helps them to produce these amazing bursts of speed. And another thing that makes them unique among the cats is that they can't fully retract their claws. So they're only semi-retractable. And that means they act a little bit like running spikes. So it gives them a really good grip. It means they can get away very fast, and they can continue to accelerate very quickly because of the level of grip that gives them. Now, I've said they're not like the other big cats, and by big cats, I'm talking about lions, tigers, leopards, and jaguars. All of those animals roar. The cheetah doesn't. It actually sounds more like a domestic cat. It will meow, it will purr, and they also make a chirping sound. So if you're listening out for a cheetah, you've got to kind of rethink what you're listening for. Now, when it comes to hunting, obviously they've got that speed. I've already mentioned they live in savanna. They'll use the long grass to hide from predators. So what they'll tend to do, they're unique again with the big cats in that they usually hunt during the day. And that's why they have those sort of tear track markings on their face. Those dark markings are there to reduce the reflections from the sun, so it just helps them with their eyesight. So that's very sharp, and that gives them better vision in bright sunshine. What they'll typically do is climb onto a termite mound or a small hill. So quite often, when you look at pictures of cheetahs when they're relaxing in the sun, you'll see them on a termite mound, and that's because they're keeping an eye out for what else is around, whether it's prey or predators. They like to prey on the smaller antelopes, so things like Thompson's gazelle or springboks. They'll go after hares. They'll even go after porcupines. So they'll tend to go after the smaller animals. Now, when they hunt, they'll chase their prey down and they'll try and knock the prey off balance so that it falls over, and then they'll grip them around the throat. So like many cats, they like to suffocate their prey by gripping them around the throat. So I've spoken about how fast they can run. In terms of how far, it's quite limited. So it's limited to about 300 meters, which is roughly 1,000 feet. So that's about as far as they can run. And after that, they are pretty much done. So it'll take them about half an hour to recover, and they'll cool off because obviously their body heat will rise quite significantly while they're running. So they cool off by panting, and they can also sweat through their pores, through the foot pads in their paws. So once they have gone after something, they then can't hunt again for probably at least half an hour before they're cool enough to have another go. Now, while the cheetah is fast, it isn't particularly strong. So when it's got its prey, often, particularly if it's an antelope, something like that, it can't drag it away. So it will have to eat the prey very quickly. And obviously you'll have other predators around that will go after carrion or go after other animals' kills. So that would include, that basically includes lions, leopards, baboons will go after their kill, jackals and hyenas. So all of those animals, if they're in the area, and they probably will be, they'll be able to chase a cheetah off its kill. So cheetahs have to eat very quickly. And while I'm on the subject of just feeding, one benefit that the cheetah has is it doesn't have to drink water that often. So every 3 to 4 days is good enough for a cheetah. Okay, so that's, I guess, broadly covered the behavior, reproduction. In terms of how many they are and where they stand on the IUCN list, so, are they threatened? Well, they are. They're currently listed as vulnerable. The last list I have is 2021, where they're listed as vulnerable. The number of mature adults in the wild is thought to be about 6,500, which is not a lot of animals. Going back, if you go back to 1960, there are about 40,000. But you have to remember that cheetahs have been seen as vermin by farmers, definitely in the 1970s. So by 1975, that 40,000 had reduced to 20,000, and now we're down to 6,500. So that's not good news. Now, there are certain threats to cheetahs. The usual one, which affects most wild animals these days, is loss of range, loss of habitat, and that's often due to farming. And of course, that then brings cheetahs into conflict with farmers, which they have been, as I've just said, really for quite a few decades. But cheetahs will hunt livestock if they don't have the range. And of course, farmers will protect their livestock. So that's an area of conflict. What also happens is because their range is being reduced, and the natural population density for cheetahs is to have 2 adults in every 100 square kilometers. So if you think of a 10 by 10K box, that's what every pair of adult cheetahs would be living in. And when you start looking at the land that's available, that kind of range is severely restricted. So another downside to that, it brings them into conflict with other predators and particularly lions. And I've mentioned about the reproduction cycle. They can have cubs every 3 months, but the mortality rate for cubs, which fall victim to lions, is something in the region of 95%. So that's a huge number of cheetah cubs are being killed by lions. And a lot of that is due to this overlapping in range because they've been forced together into the same areas. Lions will obviously also protect their range. I guess because they tend to be in prides rather than individuals, they can hunt in a group. So it's easier for them to take out a whole group of cubs. Lions will also kill adult cheetahs, so they are definitely a threat to cheetahs if you look at the situation in the wild. Now, another factor that cheetahs have to contend with is that they are very vulnerable to disease, more so than most other animals. And that's because their numbers were reduced significantly, almost to the point of extinction around 10,000 years ago. It's around the time of the last ice age. Now, cheetahs did recover, but they recovered from a very small number of animals, so a very small genetic pool. And they haven't really recovered in the sense that there's now a wide variety. So cheetahs suffer from being very closely interrelated. There's a lot of inbreeding going on, and that's left them very vulnerable genetically. And in fact, as it would happen, I was reading something more general about genetics earlier today, and this is actually true to an extent with people, in as much as we originally evolved from Africa. So that was where the sort of genetic generator, if you like, was going full tilt. Those of us who ended up in Europe, also the numbers were restricted because of the ice age, which meant there's a smaller gene pool. So those of us of European descent are much more closely related than people from Africa, because in Africa that genetic diversity continued. So there's a much greater genetic variation in Africa, which means that drugs that work well for white people don't necessarily work well for people who genetically have origins elsewhere. So that's a whole subject that I personally find quite interesting, but it's why something like 90% of drugs only work on 50 to 60% of people. It's because of genetic variations within the population, or even within subgroups of the population. So going back to cheetahs, you can imagine that they are extremely vulnerable because of that lack of diversity they have. And that's just something that is going to continue unless they should have a population explosion, which is extremely unlikely given what mankind is doing everywhere. There is another issue for them, just looking again, is that wildlife reserves aren't that good for them generally because of the range that they need. Reserves aren't the best way of keeping them going, although animals are obviously kept in captivity, and that sort of keeps the species alive, but it's not really doing much more than that. Finally, there is another subspecies of cheetah, the Asiatic cheetah, but they are all but extinct because you'll find them in Iran, and there's less than 50 animals. So if you want to see cheetahs, the cheetahs that are around, you're going to find them in Kenya, in Tanzania, Namibia and Botswana. You might get lucky. I've seen them in Tanzania, in the Serengeti. I got lucky. I saw a mother with cubs. They can be quite difficult to find. I remember going through a drive on the Serengeti, and there's a lot of very long grass. It's savanna there, that part of it. And I just got lucky. I was looking the right way, and I saw a head pop up from the grass, and it was an adult cheetah, I guess checking out what the noise was and seeing who we were. And we were able to get to a place in that area of the Serengeti where we could see cheetahs on termite mounds, see the young animals as well. These weren't cubs, these were sub-adults, so a bit bigger than cubs, didn't have the mantle, the extra fur, but nonetheless it was good to see them. So that's pretty much all I have on cheetahs. But as I say, they're one of my favourite animals. I think they're amazing looking animals. They're certainly incredibly graceful when they run. They're very powerful when they run, but obviously not strong animals. So they probably have more to contend with than a lot of the other, well, certainly the big cats. Cheetahs have a lot more to contend with, particularly because they can't protect their prey once they've killed an animal. They have to feed very fast, and they have obviously these other issues going on and other threats to their survival. So hopefully cheetahs will be one of those animals that future generations can enjoy, but they definitely have, or those trying to work to conserve cheetahs definitely have their work cut out for them. So I hope you found that useful, and I'll speak to you again on the next podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.